Sometimes the dream you mourn isn't the one you lost. It's the one someone else convinced you would never be able to build alone. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. And if you believe the strongest kind of success is the one built in silence, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, back to her story. The ballroom shimmered beneath hundreds of suspended crystal lights, each one scattering warm reflections across polished marble floors that had welcomed architects, designers, and developers from across the country. Soft piano music drifted through the enormous hall, blending effortlessly with quiet conversations and the occasional clink of champagne glasses. Every corner carried the quiet confidence of people accustomed to building beautiful things. Daniel Brooks adjusted the cuff of his navy suit while scanning the stage ahead. 5 years had passed since the last time he attended this annual design awards gala. Work had consumed most of his evenings. Life had quietly become a long series of meetings, airports, quarterly reports, and conversations that rarely lasted beyond tomorrow's schedule. Tonight was supposed to be different. One of his company's newest luxury housing developments had been shortlisted for an industry partnership award. His attendance was little more than professional courtesy. Nothing more. At least, that was what he believed. The lights gradually dimmed. Conversations softened into silence. A large screen slowly illuminated behind the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host said with a welcoming smile, "our next recognition celebrates a design studio whose work has quietly transformed the meaning of home for hundreds of American families." Images began appearing one after another. A lakeside cottage glowing beneath autumn maple trees. A restored Victorian home filled with afternoon sunlight. A modest suburban residence where children laughed barefoot across oak floors. No extravagant mansions. No impossible displays of wealth. Just homes that somehow felt deeply lived in before anyone had even moved inside. The audience watched with surprising stillness. Every photograph carried something difficult to describe. Comfort, warmth, belonging. Daniel leaned back almost absent-mindedly. Something about the spaces felt strangely familiar. Not because he had seen them before, because years earlier, he had once imagined places exactly like them. On rainy Sunday afternoons, long before everything fell apart, he and his wife used to browse architecture magazines spread across their kitchen table. Lauren would pause over cozy reading corners, oversized windows, handcrafted bookshelves, and gardens that welcomed children and old dogs alike. One day, she had whispered while tracing a floor plan with her fingertip, "I'd love to help people build homes they never want to leave." He had smiled without looking up from his coffee. Maybe someday. The memory disappeared as quickly as it arrived. The applause inside the ballroom gently pulled him back to the present. The host continued, "This year's Vision in Residential Design Award goes to..." A brief pause settled over the room. Lauren Brooks' studio. For one suspended heartbeat, Daniel thought he had misunderstood. Then the name echoed once more through the speakers. Lauren Brooks. The applause grew louder. Someone several rows ahead stood first. Then another. Soon the entire ballroom rose together. Daniel remained seated. Not because he meant to, because his body had forgotten how to move. Slowly, almost cautiously, his eyes lifted toward the stage. A woman stepped from behind the velvet curtain wearing a simple ivory evening gown that reflected the soft amber lights without demanding attention. Her blonde hair rested neatly across one shoulder. She carried no dramatic expression, no victorious smile, only quiet composure. 5 years had changed Lauren, not by making her someone different, by allowing her to become someone she had never been given the chance to be. She accepted the applause with the same gentle nod she had once offered neighbors carrying groceries, elderly clients choosing paint colors, and children proudly showing her crayon drawings of their dream bedrooms. There was no trace of revenge. No hint that this moment belonged to anyone except the families whose lives she had helped shape. Daniel felt his heartbeat echo inside the silence he suddenly noticed around him. He had spent years believing Lauren disappeared after the divorce. Instead, she had quietly built the very dream they once imagined together. Only now, his name no longer belonged anywhere inside it. The loudest applause of the evening faded into a quiet murmur, but Daniel Brooks remained exactly where he was. Around him, guests slowly lowered themselves back into their seats while the spotlight followed Lauren across the stage with gentle warmth. It should have felt like any other award ceremony. Instead, It felt strangely personal. The presenter handed her a crystal trophy that reflected the amber glow of the chandeliers. "Congratulations," he said. Lauren accepted it with both hands. "Thank you." Her voice carried no excitement that demanded attention. It was calm, grateful, almost understated. The audience applauded again, not because she encouraged them to, but because something about her quiet presence invited respect rather than admiration. Daniel barely heard the words that followed. His attention lingered on details no one else seemed to notice. The way she stood without nervousness, the relaxed smile that reached her eyes, the confidence that didn't need to prove itself. 5 years earlier, Lauren had rarely enjoyed standing in front of crowds. She preferred letting other people speak while she quietly listened. At neighborhood gatherings, she always found herself helping in the kitchen before anyone asked. During company dinners, she remembered everyone's birthdays while forgetting to mention her own accomplishments. Success had not changed who she was. It had simply removed the uncertainty she once carried. The large screen behind her shifted to another series of photographs. A young couple sat on the porch of a white farmhouse, laughing while holding cups of coffee beneath strings of glowing lights. Another image appeared. An elderly widower stood beside a restored fireplace, smiling quietly at framed family photographs lining the mantel. Then came a little girl sitting inside a window seat, reading a book while afternoon sunlight poured across oak floors. Each photograph remained on screen only a few seconds. Yet together, they told a story larger than architecture. Lauren had never been designing houses. She had been creating places where people wanted to stay. The presenter smiled toward the audience. When our judges reviewed this year's finalists, one comment appeared repeatedly. He unfolded a small card. "Every project feels less like a luxury home and more like a memory waiting to happen." A soft ripple of appreciation moved through the ballroom. Lauren lowered her eyes for a brief moment before looking back toward the audience. "I've always believed," she began gently, "that people rarely remember the square footage of a house." A few guests smiled. They remember where their daughter took her first steps. Another pause. They remember the kitchen where everyone gathered every Thanksgiving. Several people nodded almost instinctively. They remember the chair beside the window where someone waited for them to come home. Silence settled over the ballroom. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that arrives when words quietly find their way into people's own memories. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He knew those sentences. Not exactly, but close enough. Years ago, they had spent countless evenings sitting on the living room floor surrounded by magazines, sketchbooks, and cups of coffee growing cold beside them. Lauren used to point toward photographs of cozy homes while talking about feelings instead of furniture. "A beautiful home," she once whispered, "is the one people are always happy to return to." He remembered laughing softly. "And who's going to design all these beautiful homes?" She had shrugged with an embarrassed smile. "Probably someone much more talented than me." Daniel had reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You never know." The memory ended there. Not because nothing happened afterward. Because he suddenly remembered something he had forgotten for years. Lauren hadn't abandoned that dream. He had. The ballroom erupted into applause once more as Lauren stepped away from the microphone. She never looked toward Daniel. She had no reason to. She didn't know he was. Sitting among hundreds of strangers watching the life they once imagined unfold beneath golden lights. And perhaps, the most painful realization wasn't seeing how successful she had become. It was discovering that while he had spent 5 years chasing a different future, she had quietly remained faithful to the dream they once shared. Applause continued long after Lauren stepped away from the microphone, yet she never paused to absorb it. She thanked the presenter once more, exchanged a quiet handshake with one of the judges, and disappeared behind the stage curtains as naturally as someone leaving an ordinary meeting rather than one of the most celebrated moments of her career. Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the empty stage. The spotlight lingered for another second before slowly fading. Only then did he realize he had been holding his breath. The evening's program continued. Another award, another speech, another standing ovation. He heard none of it. Instead, his thoughts drifted somewhere they had not visited in years. 5 years earlier, the rain had been falling since early afternoon, turning the living room windows into blurred sheets of silver. Lauren stood quietly beside the dining table, both hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that had long since gone cold. Outside, Maple trees swayed gently beneath the autumn wind. Inside, the silence between them had become heavier than either of them knew how to carry. Daniel avoided her eyes. "I didn't plan for this," he finally said. Lauren looked at him calmly. "You don't have to explain." He swallowed. "I never meant to hurt you." She nodded once. "I know." That answer somehow made everything more difficult. He walked toward the window before speaking again. "Rachel reached out a few months ago." Lauren remained perfectly still. "We started talking." Another silence. "I realized." His voice grew quieter. "There were feelings I never completely let go of." Rain tapped softly against the glass. Lauren lowered her eyes toward the wedding ring resting on her finger. Not because she wanted to remove it. Because she suddenly understood she already had. Not physically. Emotionally. She had felt him slipping. Away long before he found the courage to admit it. "When?" she asked gently. Daniel closed his eyes. "I don't know." She offered a faint, almost sympathetic smile. "I think you do." He didn't answer. There was nothing left that words could improve. After another long moment, Lauren placed her untouched mug into the sink with extraordinary care. The small sound of porcelain touching stainless steel echoed through the quiet kitchen. She turned back toward him. "Is she the life you really wanted?" Daniel looked at her for what felt like the first time all evening. No accusation waited in her expression. No anger. Only a woman trying to understand the ending of a story she had spent years believing would last forever. "I think." He hesitated, then answered with painful honesty. "I think she always was." The sentence settled over the room like winter arriving before anyone noticed autumn had ended. Lauren didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply nodded once more. Not because the words didn't hurt. Because denying them would hurt even more. Daniel waited for questions. For blame. For tears. Instead, she walked quietly toward the bookshelf in the corner of the living room. Resting, there was a large leather binder filled with magazine clippings, sketches, handwritten notes, and photographs collected over nearly 7 years of marriage. Their dream book. Tiny cottages beside lakes. Family kitchens. Garden pathways. Reading corners beneath wide windows. The home they once promised to build together. Lauren ran her fingertips gently across the worn cover before closing it. She smiled. Small. Heartbroken. Beautiful in its quiet dignity. "I hope," she whispered without looking at him, "you find everything you've been searching for." Daniel stared at her, uncertain why those words felt heavier than any argument ever could. He thought she was letting him go. What he failed to understand was that she had just begun letting herself go free. Back inside the ballroom, another wave of applause echoed through the grand hall. Daniel blinked. The memory dissolved. Yet one image refused to leave him. Not the divorce. Not Rachel. Not the rain. Only the old leather binder, resting on a bookshelf, filled with dreams he had forgotten. Dreams Lauren had never stopped believing were worth building. The award ceremony continued, but Daniel no longer saw the stage. His gaze drifted toward the empty wings where Lauren had disappeared only moments earlier. Somewhere behind those curtains, reporters were probably asking about her projects. Colleagues were likely congratulating her. Photographers were capturing the smile of a woman whose name had quietly become one of the most respected in residential design. He wondered how any of it had happened. Not because Lauren lacked talent, because when they were married, life had always seemed to leave her dream waiting until tomorrow. Tomorrow, after the mortgage. Tomorrow, after his promotion. Tomorrow, after they had saved a little more money. Tomorrow became years. And somehow, tomorrow had belonged only to him. 5 years earlier, the house felt unusually quiet after Daniel packed the last of his boxes. Lauren stood alone in the front hallway long after the sound of his car disappeared down the street. The silence was startling. Not dramatic. Just unfamiliar. For the first time in nearly a decade, every decision waiting inside that house belonged only to her. She walked slowly from room to room. The living room where they had watched old movies on rainy weekends. The kitchen where unfinished conversations still seemed to linger in the air. The guest room they once hoped would someday become a nursery. Each space held a version of the future that would never arrive. She could have stayed. Many people expected she would. But every corner whispered memories louder than peace. 3 weeks later, a small for sale sign appeared in the front yard. Neighbors were surprised. Some quietly wondered whether she was running away from her past. Lauren knew the truth. She wasn't leaving because the house was broken. She was leaving because she deserved to build a home that no longer belonged to someone else's memories. The day she handed over the keys, the elderly couple buying the property thanked her warmly. "We promise we'll take good care of it," the wife said. Lauren smiled. "I know you will." She looked back only once before driving away. Not to mourn, to say goodbye. Her new apartment occupied the second floor of an old brick building overlooking a neighborhood coffee shop. It was small enough that morning sunlight reached almost every corner by breakfast. There were no vaulted ceilings or expensive finishes. The floors creaked gently in winter, and the radiator hummed every evening after sunset. It was imperfect, and somehow, it felt like the first place she had truly chosen for herself. One Saturday morning, she carried the old leather binder onto the kitchen table. Dust floated through narrow beams of golden light while she slowly turned each page. Magazine clippings, sketches, color palettes, handwritten notes filled with ideas she had almost forgotten. At first, every page reminded her of Daniel. Then something unexpected happened. The memories gradually became quieter than the dreams themselves. She realized those homes had never belonged to their marriage. They had belonged to her imagination. For hours, she sat surrounded by scattered papers, pencils, and blank notebooks. She wasn't making business plans. She wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. She simply began drawing again. A reading nook beside oversized windows. A family kitchen designed for Sunday dinners. A front porch where grandparents could watch grandchildren chase fireflies on warm summer evenings. One sketch became 5. 5 became 20. 20 slowly filled another binder. Outside, customers laughed as they entered the cafe downstairs. The smell of fresh coffee drifted through the open window while church bells echoed somewhere beyond the neighborhood rooftops. For the first time since the divorce, Lauren noticed something remarkable. The ache was still there, but it was no longer the loudest voice inside her. Hope had quietly begun speaking again. And unlike heartbreak, hope never demanded attention. It simply waited for someone brave enough to listen. The first client almost never happened. Lauren had nearly canceled the meeting twice. She stood outside a small neighborhood cafe 15 minutes early, clutching a leather portfolio that still smelled faintly of fresh paper and printer ink. Inside were sketches she had drawn over countless evenings, each one revised until every window, every staircase, and every reading corner felt exactly right. None of them had ever been built. Not yet. She took a slow breath before pushing open the glass door. The aroma of roasted coffee beans wrapped around the room, mingling with quiet conversations and the gentle hiss of steaming milk. Sunlight spilled across worn wooden tables where students studied, freelancers typed on laptops, and elderly couples lingered over breakfast. Near the window sat an older woman with silver hair tied neatly into a loose bun. "Lauren?" she asked warmly. Lauren smiled. "Mrs. Parker?" The woman nodded. "I've heard wonderful things about your ideas." Lauren almost laughed. "No one has seen them yet." Mrs. Parker leaned forward with a knowing smile. "Someone has." She tapped gently on Lauren's portfolio. "You." For nearly 2 hours, they talked less about blueprints than about memories. Mrs. Parker wasn't looking for an expensive renovation. She wanted a place where her grandchildren would beg to spend Christmas every year. A kitchen large enough for cookie dough and flour-covered laughter. A fireplace where old family stories could survive another generation. Lauren listened carefully, writing almost nothing down. She simply watched the way Mrs. Parker's face brightened whenever she described home. By the time they left the cafe, Lauren realized something important. Design wasn't about walls. It was about the lives waiting to unfold between them. That single project became another. Then another. Some weeks there was only one client. Other months there were none at all. Money remained painfully tight. She spent mornings visiting construction sites, afternoons drafting floor plans, and evenings answering emails from a tiny desk squeezed beside her apartment window. When she couldn't afford expensive design software, she stayed late at the public library. When she couldn't hire assistants, she measured rooms herself. When projects fell through, she quietly started again the next morning. There were no dramatic breakthroughs, only ordinary days repeated with extraordinary consistency. Meanwhile, life carried Daniel in a very different direction. His apartment with Rachel overlooked the city skyline, filled with sleek furniture and spotless white walls chosen from expensive catalogs. Everything looked perfect. Everything matched. Yet most evenings ended with separate screens, separate schedules, and conversations interrupted by buzzing phones. Rachel loved traveling. Daniel loved advancing his career. Neither seemed to notice how little time remained for building a life together. Sometimes, passing beautifully restored homes on his drive to work, Daniel caught himself slowing the car. Something about them stirred an old familiarity. A front porch wrapped around a maple tree. A wide kitchen window facing the backyard. A reading nook beneath a staircase. The feeling disappeared before he could understand why. Back across town, Lauren stood inside Mrs. Parker's newly completed home. Children raced through the hallway while the smell of cinnamon drifted from the kitchen. The elderly woman wiped away tears as her granddaughter wrapped small arms around her waist. "I never imagined it could feel like this," she whispered. Lauren looked around quietly. Fresh paint, morning light, laughter echoing through rooms that only months before had existed as pencil lines on blank paper. No award could measure that moment. No magazine cover could replace it. As she stepped onto the front porch, autumn leaves floated gently across the front yard. She smiled to herself. 5 years ago, she thought she had lost the future she was meant to build. Standing there, listening to a family make their first memories inside a home she had imagined long before it existed. Lauren finally understood. Dreams don't disappear when someone walks away. Sometimes, they simply wait for the right person to keep building them. The final dance had not yet begun, but the evening already carried the satisfied rhythm of people convinced the story was over. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across the ballroom, while the string quartet drifted effortlessly from one familiar melody to another. Champagne glasses caught flashes of gold every time someone laughed. Around the room, conversations blended into a polished hum that sounded expensive enough to hide almost anything. Claire remained exactly where she had chosen to sit. Not hidden, not displayed, simply present. She traced one finger lightly around the rim of her untouched glass before lifting her eyes toward the ballroom entrance again. Still closed. She smiled almost imperceptibly. Some arrivals never benefited from being early. Across the room, Ryan accepted another handshake. Every congratulation seemed to strengthen his confidence. Vanessa stood beside him, elegant beneath the ballroom lights, greeting guests with the practiced ease of someone already imagining herself admired. They believed the evening belonged to them. Claire no longer needed to disagree. She already knew time would. A waiter approached quietly. "Would you like another sparkling water, ma'am?" She nodded politely. "Thank you." Nothing more. No nervous questions. No restless glances. Only calm. The waiter returned moments later, placing the fresh glass before her with both hands. For reasons he could not explain, he hesitated. "You seem very peaceful," he said softly. Claire looked up with gentle surprise before offering the smallest smile. "I've already lived through the hardest part." The young waiter smiled back, almost relieved, before disappearing into the crowd. She watched him leave. Healing always recognized healing. Beyond the ballroom walls, the city shimmered beneath the cool autumn night. Traffic flowed across the river. Office towers reflected thousands of scattered lights into the dark water below. Somewhere beyond those streets, another car moved quietly toward the hotel. Inside, laughter continued. Outside, destiny kept its own schedule. Claire glanced once at her watch. 8:47, not because she was impatient, because she knew someone who disliked arriving late. Her thoughts drifted effortlessly toward Ethan. During the 3 years they had known each other, he had never promised dramatic rescues. He never spoke about changing her life. He simply kept every ordinary promise. If he said he would call, he called. If he promised dinner on Thursday, dinner happened on Thursday. If Lily had a piano recital, nothing interrupted it. If Noah wanted pancakes on Sunday morning, pancakes somehow appeared before anyone asked twice. Reliability had become its own kind of romance. Claire hadn't fallen in love because Ethan was successful. She had fallen in love because peace slowly replaced uncertainty whenever he entered a room. There was no performance, only consistency. She remembered one rainy evening several months earlier. Power had gone out across Ethan's neighborhood after a summer storm. Candles filled the dining room with soft amber light, while Noah complained dramatically about losing internet access. Lily declared the blackout an adventure. Ethan simply laughed. They played board games, burned marshmallows over the fireplace, told embarrassing childhood stories until everyone forgot the electricity had disappeared. Driving home that night, Claire realized something beautiful. Happiness no longer arrived through extraordinary moments. It had quietly settled inside ordinary evenings. Back in the ballroom, applause interrupted her memory. Another speech had ended. Guests returned to their conversations. Ryan raised his champagne glass once more while photographers gathered nearby. Everything continued exactly according to schedule. Exactly as planned. Exactly as expected. Almost. Claire lifted her eyes toward the entrance one final time. This time the large wooden doors moved. Not dramatically. Slowly. Quietly. Just enough for a sliver of warm hallway light to spill across the polished marble floor. Her smile returned. Not triumphant. Not excited. Certain. Some chapters never announce themselves with noise. Sometimes, they simply walk through the door. The ballroom did not fall silent all at once. It happened the way evening settles over a lake. Slowly enough that nobody notices until the water is already still. The string quartet continued playing. Champagne continued flowing. Yet conversation began fading table by table as every pair of curious eyes drifted toward the entrance. Claire was the first to move. Not quickly. Not dramatically. She simply stood. The chair slid back with the softest whisper against polished marble. Across the room, Ryan paused in the middle of another conversation. His smile remained in place, but only because habit held it there. Something about Claire's expression felt unfamiliar. She was no longer watching the celebration. She was welcoming someone. Beyond the ballroom doors, Ethan stepped inside with Lily and Noah beside him. His charcoal suit carried the quiet elegance that never asked for attention. Lily smoothed the front of her pale blue dress with both hands before looking around excitedly. Noah tugged gently at the sleeve of his tiny navy jacket, determined to look older than his 6 years. Ethan leaned down and whispered something neither child could wait to finish hearing. Both smiled instantly. Then they looked across the ballroom. The moment Lily spotted Claire, joy erased every reminder that they had been instructed to walk politely. There she is. She squeezed Noah's hand. The little boy followed her gaze. His entire face lit up. Without another thought, both children hurried forward. Guests instinctively stepped aside. Nobody asked them to. People simply made room. Ryan frowned slightly. Who are they? Vanessa followed the children's path through the crowd. I don't know. Neither of them noticed Ethan deliberately remaining several steps behind. Some moments deserved to belong entirely to children. Claire waited where she was. Her smile carried no trace of nervousness. Only love. Only home. The distance between them disappeared in seconds. Lily reached her first. Mom. Her voice rang far more clearly than she intended. The single word floated effortlessly beneath the crystal chandeliers before settling across the ballroom like unexpected snowfall. Silence answered it. A champagne flute stopped halfway toward someone's lips. A waiter froze beside the dessert table. Even the musicians seemed to soften without realizing why. Ryan stared. His expression emptied before confusion rushed in to replace it. Noah wrapped both arms around Claire's waist. Mom, we made it. Claire laughed quietly as she knelt. One hand brushed Lily's hair behind her ear. The other rested gently against Noah's shoulder. There was nothing awkward about the embrace. Nothing rehearsed. Nothing designed for an audience. It carried the effortless rhythm of countless mornings before school, bedtime stories, birthday cakes, scraped knees, ordinary Saturdays that quietly become family. Nobody needed an explanation. The truth lived inside the way those children reached for her without hesitation. Whispers spread gently across nearby tables. I thought, are those? When did? No sentence seemed able to finish itself. Ryan remained motionless. His champagne glass lowered almost unconsciously. Years ago, Claire had spoken softly about wanting children someday. He remembered dismissing the conversation. There would always be more time. Now time stood smiling only a few yards away. Ethan finally reached them. Noah immediately reached back for his hand without releasing Claire. Lily leaned comfortably against Claire's shoulder as though there had never been another place she belonged. For a brief moment, Ethan looked at Claire. She looked back. Neither of them spoke. Some promises never required words. He simply smiled. Not proudly. Gratefully. Claire returned the smile with the quiet certainty of someone who no longer questioned whether she deserved happiness. Around them, the celebration continued. Music played. Glasses sparkled. Flowers perfumed the warm evening air. Yet every expensive decoration suddenly felt less remarkable than the ordinary scene unfolding beside table 14. Because family had just entered the room. Not through blood, not through performance, but through years of showing up when nobody else was watching. And for the first time that entire evening, Ryan understood something success had never managed to teach him. The woman he believed he had left behind had never been waiting for someone to choose her. She had already been chosen. Every single day, there are revelations that arrive through words. Others arrive because an entire room suddenly knows how to behave around one person. Claire never introduced Ethan. She never announced his accomplishments. She never reached for the microphone waiting near the stage. She simply remained beside him while Lily and Noah chatted excitedly about school, completely unaware that hundreds of quiet observations were beginning to reshape the evening. Ryan watched from across the ballroom. The confidence that had carried him through the reception was slipping away piece by piece. He had expected embarrassment. Instead, he was witnessing belonging. Vanessa leaned closer. "Who is he?" Ryan slowly shook his head. "I don't know." For the first time in years, those three words tasted unfamiliar. Before either of them could say another, the ballroom entrance opened once again. Not dramatically, professionally. The hotel's general manager stepped inside. Behind him came two senior managers, followed by the director of guest relations. Several employees immediately straightened their posture. One waiter quietly adjusted his jacket. Another lowered the tray he had been carrying. The movement spread naturally through the staff, invisible to most guests, but unmistakable to anyone who understood luxury hospitality. Someone important had just been recognized. The general manager walked directly across the ballroom. Not toward the bride. Not toward the groom. Not toward the investors gathered near the stage. Toward Ethan. Conversation faded once more. The manager stopped a respectful distance away before offering a warm smile. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes." Ethan returned the smile just as politely. "Good evening. I hope everything has been satisfactory." "It has been wonderful." The manager nodded with visible relief. "We're honored to have you with us tonight." Several nearby guests exchanged confused glances. Ryan's eyes narrowed. The tone felt different. Not the politeness offered to wealthy clients. Something deeper. Respect. The general manager turned gently toward Claire. "And Mrs. Hayes." His voice carried the same warmth. "It is always a pleasure to welcome you back." Claire smiled. "Thank you." Lily reached for Ethan's hand. "Dad," she whispered. "Can we have dessert now?" Ethan laughed quietly. "I think that's an excellent idea." The ordinary conversation somehow made the extraordinary moment even more powerful. No performance. No attempt to impress. Only people completely comfortable inside a life they had never needed to advertise. Before leaving, the general manager hesitated. "If you'll allow me." He glanced briefly toward Ryan's table before returning his attention to Ethan. "Our chairman asked me to personally welcome you. He'll be arriving shortly for tomorrow morning's board meeting." Ethan nodded. "Please thank him for the message." The manager inclined his head respectfully before stepping away. Silence lingered behind him. One guest near the bar frowned thoughtfully. "Hayes." Another executive slowly looked up from his wine glass. "Wait." Recognition spread across his face. "You mean Ethan Hayes?" The man beside him blinked. "The chairman of Hayes Global Holdings?" A woman standing nearby covered her mouth. "No." Another quietly answered. "Yes." More whispers followed. "I've seen him in Forbes. He owns the investment group. They acquired 3 Fortune 500 companies." I didn't recognize him. Ryan felt every sentence land heavier than the one before. The ballroom itself seemed unchanged. Crystal chandeliers still shimmered overhead. Music still floated gently through the air. Champagne still sparkled beneath warm golden light. Yet everything had shifted. Moments earlier, Ethan had simply been an unfamiliar guest accompanying Claire. Now the room understood why hotel executives had crossed an entire ballroom to greet him personally. Not because he demanded recognition, because recognition naturally followed him. Ryan looked toward Claire again. She hadn't moved. She hadn't smiled differently. She hadn't searched the room to see who had finally understood. Nothing about her changed, because she had never needed the room's approval to know exactly who stood beside her. For years, Ryan believed success announced itself with louder voices, larger houses, and grander celebrations. Standing only a few yards away, he finally discovered the quieter truth. Real power never introduces itself. Everyone else does. No applause followed the revelation. No dramatic music swelled beneath the chandeliers. The evening simply continued. And somehow, that made everything infinitely more powerful. Claire accepted a small dessert plate from a passing waiter, while Noah immediately reached for a chocolate-covered strawberry. Only one, Ethan reminded him. The little boy grinned. Maybe two. Lily laughed before quietly taking the tiny spoon Claire offered her. For several peaceful minutes, they existed inside a world untouched by whispers, fortunes, or old regrets. A family sharing dessert. Nothing more. Nothing less. Across the ballroom, Ryan remained exactly where he stood. The noise around him had returned, yet it reached him only as distant echoes. He watched Claire laugh at something Noah whispered. He watched Ethan straighten Lily's ribbon after it slipped from her shoulder. Small gestures, invisible to anyone chasing status. Impossible to ignore once you understood what love actually looked like. Ryan searched desperately for the woman he remembered. The woman who had waited for his approval. The woman who apologized first after every argument. The woman who believed loving him was enough to build a future. She was gone. Not because another man had changed her. Because pain had. Healing had. Time had. Vanessa finally spoke. So, she hesitated. Were we wrong about her? Ryan didn't answer immediately. His eyes never left Claire. No. His voice came quietly. We were wrong about me. The admission disappeared into the music before anyone else could hear it. But he heard it. For the first time in years. Completely. On the opposite side of the ballroom, Ethan checked his watch. We should let the children get home. Claire nodded. It is a school night. Lily groaned dramatically. I was hoping tomorrow was Saturday. Everyone laughed. Even Noah rolled his eyes. You say that every Thursday. Claire reached for Ethan's hand naturally. There was no hesitation. No audience. Just familiarity earned one ordinary day after another. They thanked the nearby guests who had greeted them. Wished the bride and groom a sincere congratulations as they passed. Claire stopped briefly in front of Ryan. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. Everything important had already happened. Ryan searched her face for resentment. For triumph. For satisfaction. He found none. Only peace. A peace he had mistaken for weakness years before. Claire offered the smallest smile. Not forgiveness. Not revenge. Simply acknowledgement. Then she continued walking. Ethan opened the ballroom doors for her. Lily skipped through first. Noah followed, still carrying the last bite of his dessert. Claire stepped into the quiet hallway without once looking back. Ethan walked beside her. The doors closed softly behind them. Inside, the reception continued exactly as planned. Outside, cool evening air welcomed them beneath a sky scattered with patient stars. The city shimmered beyond the hotel entrance. Their car waited at the curb. The driver opened the door. Lily climbed inside. Noah followed. Before entering, Claire paused for one final moment. Not because someone had called her name. Because she wanted to breathe. The night smelled of rain on distant pavement. She closed her eyes briefly. Years earlier, she had believed survival itself would be enough. Then she discovered something greater. She had not merely survived. She had become someone the frightened woman she once was would hardly recognize. Not richer. Not more admired. Simply freer. She slipped into the car. Ethan joined her. The vehicle